Dolly Parton's nephew just revealed the one thing she asked him to do before she died. There is one detail about Dolly Parton's death that fans are only discovering now. And honestly, it changes the way many people look at her final days. Because years before Dolly Parton passed away, she reportedly had a conversation with her nephew, Brian Seaver, about something most families would never want to discuss. A conversation about the day she would no longer be here. And during that conversation, Dolly told him exactly what she wanted him to do when she was gone. Not her manager, not a publicist, not a television network. Brian, he was the person she trusted. And when Dolly died at 80 on August 25th, 2026, he did exactly what she had asked. But this is where the story becomes even more fascinating. Why would Dolly make that kind of arrangement years before it was ever needed? What did she know? And why was this particular family member the one she trusted with such a painful responsibility? Because the more we learn about Dolly's final days, the more questions seem to appear. And there is one detail from just 4 days before her death that makes this story even harder to understand. On August 21st, Dolly was still talking publicly about her future. She acknowledged that she had been dealing with serious health challenges. But she wasn't speaking like someone who believed her journey was ending. Not at all. She was talking about the things she still wanted to achieve, the projects she still wanted to complete, the dreams she still wanted to chase. She was still thinking about work, still making plans, still looking ahead. And then, just 4 days later, everything changed. Dolly Parton was gone. Her representatives later confirmed that she had been battling cancer. And suddenly, that private conversation she once had with Brian about announcing her death carried a completely different meaning. Think about that for a moment. A woman who spent her entire life reminding people to believe in tomorrow had quietly prepared one trusted family member for the day when there would be no tomorrow for her. And according to Brian, Dolly made that request years earlier. She wanted him to be the one to tell the world. But that wasn't simply an announcement. It was a responsibility. And Brian understood exactly how much that moment mattered. He wasn't just a random relative suddenly placed in the spotlight. He had been Dolly's longtime head of security. He knew her personally. He had spent years close enough to see the Dolly that millions of fans never truly saw. Not the rhinestones, not the massive stages, not the carefully created celebrity image. The woman behind it all. And maybe that is exactly why Dolly chose him. Because when millions of people eventually heard that Dolly Parton was gone, she apparently wanted the first voice they heard to belong to someone who truly knew her. Someone who understood the person behind the legend. But there is something even more interesting about this. Dolly Parton had always been incredibly protective of her private life. She could control an interview. She could control performance. She could control the way the world saw her. But death is different. Death is the one thing no celebrity can completely control. So perhaps Dolly did the next best thing. She controlled what happened after. And that is where Dolly's final wishes become surprisingly personal. Because Brian didn't only reveal that Dolly had asked him to announce her death. He also shared another wish that sounds almost unbelievably simple. After decades of wearing dazzling rhinestones and glamorous outfits, Dolly wanted comfort. She wanted to rest in a beautiful bed of plush cotton. That's it. After a lifetime of sparkle, she wanted something soft, something peaceful. And somehow, that small detail reveals more about Dolly than another 100 awards ever could. The woman who spent decades looking larger than life wasn't asking for some extravagant final performance. She wanted peace. She wanted comfort. And she wanted to be close to Carl Dean. Carl had died in March 2025 after nearly 60 years of marriage. And Dolly's final year was deeply shaped by that loss. She had spoken about how much she missed him, how much his absence changed her life. She had also acknowledged that caring for Carl during his final years meant she sometimes placed her own health needs aside. And that detail matters. Because suddenly, Dolly's final chapter wasn't only about an aging superstar trying to keep working. It was about a woman who had spent years caring for the person she loved most, while quietly carrying her own struggles. And yet, she kept going. She kept recording. She kept developing new projects. She kept talking about the future. She kept finding reasons to move forward. That's what makes those final days so heartbreaking. Because Dolly didn't appear to have mentally surrendered to the idea that her story was ending. She was still planning, still dreaming, still Dolly. And perhaps that's why her conversation with Brian is so fascinating. She could prepare for death, without allowing death to become the focus of her life. There's a difference. She wasn't telling the world goodbye. She was simply making sure her family knew what to do when that inevitable moment eventually arrived. And maybe that tells us something important about the woman behind the legend. Dolly was a planner. She built businesses. She built Dollywood. She built the Imagination Library. She built a music catalog that would continue to inspire generations. She was always thinking about what would remain after the moment was over. So why wouldn't she think about her own legacy? But here's where the story becomes even more fascinating. Because Dolly didn't just leave behind old songs. She apparently left something behind for people who won't even be alive to remember her as she was. There's a previously unreleased song connected to a Dollywood time capsule that was created for a future generation. It isn't simply another song. It's something Dolly deliberately prepared to be heard long after she was gone. And now that she has died, that future recording carries a completely different meaning. Imagine hearing Dolly's voice years from now, when she has already been gone for decades. Imagine opening something she personally left behind. It means Dolly wasn't only thinking about her own lifetime. She was thinking about people she would never meet. And maybe that is the thread that runs through her entire life. She came from very little, but she thought very big. She became one of the world's biggest stars, but she never lost connection to where she came from. She made millions, but she used much of her influence to help people who had less. And when it came time to think about her own death, she focused on family, comfort, and what would remain behind. That's why Brian's revelation feels so different from an ordinary celebrity obituary. It's not simply, Dolly Parton died. We already know that. The fascinating question is, what did Dolly know? What did she prepare for? And why did she trust Brian with a goodbye? Maybe we'll never know every detail, and we shouldn't pretend we do. Dolly kept parts of her life private for a reason. But we do know something extraordinary. She had already chosen the person who would speak for her when she could no longer speak for herself. And when that terrible day came, he kept his promise. There's something almost cinematic about that. Dolly spent her life giving people words when they didn't know what to say. She gave people songs for heartbreak, songs for hope, songs for starting over. And then, in the end, she left one final responsibility to someone she trusted. Tell them I'm gone. And perhaps most importantly, tell them I love them. Her family later shared a message that captured that sentiment. I will always love you. For decades, those words could have sounded like something Dolly might say to a fan after a concert. Now, they sound like a goodbye. And that's why people are struggling to let go. Because Dolly Parton wasn't just famous. She was familiar. For people who grew up listening to her, she was part of the soundtrack of their lives. Maybe Jolene was playing during a particular chapter. Maybe 9 to 5 reminds someone of the years they spent working. Maybe I Will Always Love You is connected to someone they loved and lost. Maybe Dolly's voice simply feels like home. And that is the strange thing about losing someone you've never met. You can still feel like something has been taken from you. Dolly belonged to millions of people in that way. But her family knew something the rest of us never could. They knew the Dolly behind the legend. And Brian was apparently trusted to protect that final piece of her story. So perhaps the most haunting part of this entire story isn't that Dolly Parton had prepared for her death. It's that she was still preparing for life. Just 4 days before she died, she was still talking about what she wanted to accomplish. She was still looking forward. She still had plans. And then suddenly, those plans became part of her legacy instead. That's life. We make plans because we believe tomorrow is coming. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it doesn't. Dolly understood that better than most. And perhaps that's why she prepared the people she loved, without allowing that preparation to stop her from living. She spent her life turning hardship into hope. She turned a poor childhood into an extraordinary career. She turned songs into comfort. She turned success into opportunity for others. And now, Even after her death, pieces of her are still waiting to be discovered. A song, a story, a memory, a book, a place, a voice, and a promise that her nephew kept. So I want to know something from you. When you think about Dolly Parton, what is the first thing you remember? Is it a song? A movie? Dollywood? Her laugh? Her unmistakable voice? Or was there a moment in your own life when something Dolly Parton said or sang helped you through a difficult time? Tell us in the comments. Because Dolly spent her entire life making people feel like they weren't alone. And maybe that's why, even now, she still doesn't feel entirely gone. The woman may be gone. The voice remains. The songs remain. The memories remain. And somewhere in the future, another Dolly Parton song is waiting to be heard. And perhaps that's exactly how she wanted it. Not to be remembered because she was famous, but because she made people feel something.